Jonah Cross had always been a bit of an oddball in the military world. A technician, not a soldier, he spent his days buried in data logs, repairing systems, and quietly admiring the project he worked on. He was obsessed with dinosaurs, specifically the Tyrannosaurus rex, and was fascinated by the idea of resurrecting these mighty creatures for military purposes. The government had been toying with the idea for years, but Jonah was just a cog in the machine, never truly part of the real action that was, until the day everything changed. IT had started like any other day. Jonah was in his usual place, buried in the lab's dull hum, fixing the systems that powered the facility's dinosaur gene editing technology. The project was top secret, and Jonah had always known it was big, real big, but even he wasn't prepared for what was about to unfold. "Jonah, we need you in the lab," a voice crackled over the intercom. Jonah had barely registered the request before the door to his little corner of the facility swung open. A team of military personnel stormed in, led by Lieutenant Garrison, a no-nonsense officer with a perpetually furrowed brow. "What's up?" Jonah asked, a half-smile crossing his face. He was used to being the backup guy, the one who fixed everything without getting in anyone's way. "We've got a problem, Cross. A big one. They need you to activate the new batch of soldiers," Garrison said, his tone curt. "Now." Jonah stood up, stretching his legs. "Right. Let's see what we've got this time," he said, walking toward the control panel. The project had always been on the cutting edge, military-grade genetically modified dinosaurs, with the T-Rex as the centerpiece. The idea was simple: genetically enhance these ancient beasts for battle, create the perfect weapons to fight humanity's enemies. As Jonah scanned the readouts on the screen, he noted a few errors in the data. The modifications weren't quite right. The adjustments to the neural networks of the dinosaurs' brains hadn't gone as planned, and the whole project was on the edge of a critical failure. But before Jonah could voice his concerns, Garrison was already barking orders, too eager to let him finish his analysis. "Activate them, Cross. Now." Jonah's fingers hovered over the keypad. He knew the system well enough to understand the risks. One wrong move, and the whole facility could be in danger. But the pressure was mounting, Garrison's glare was icy, and the room was filled with tension. Jonah hesitated. Something didn't feel right. "Fine," he muttered, pressing the activation sequence. The lights in the room dimmed as the system hummed to life. Jonah's heart raced. Then, a sudden surge in the control panel's readings caught his attention. The power grid spiked, a violent flash of red lighting up the room. And before he could react, the unthinkable happened: the vial. The vial of experimental serum intended for the latest genetic experiment. It fell right onto the floor beneath Jonah's feet. Jonah's eyes went wide as the glass shattered, the liquid seeping into his skin before he could step back. It was supposed to be for the dinosaurs, not for him. The formula was meant to enhance the creatures, give them the cognitive abilities of modern animals and the instincts of their prehistoric ancestors. Jonah hadn't expected it to enhance him. The room around him blurred as a tidal wave of heat surged through his body. He felt his muscles tighten, his senses sharpen, and a pulse of power surged through his bloodstream. His heart raced as he gasped for breath. Jonah's vision was overwhelmed with images of towering beasts with sharp teeth, massive claws, and prehistoric power. Dinosaurs. It wasn't just in his mind. Jonah could hear their thoughts. The raptors. The T-Rex. The Triceratops. All of them, silently screaming, thrashing in the confines of their cages. But now, they weren't in cages. They were in his mind. All at once. "Jonah. What the hell did you do?" Garrison's voice sounded like it came from a distance. Jonah staggered, falling to his knees as the wave of energy continued to pulse through his body. It wasn't just physical. It was mental. His body felt like it was transforming, merging with the raw, primal instincts of the dinosaurs. His mind raced as he tried to understand what was happening. His vision shifted again. he saw himself, his reflection, but something wasn't right. His teeth were sharper. His eyes glowed a bright, unnatural green. The feeling of raw, untamed power surged through him like a tidal wave. "Jonah?" Garrison's voice was closer now, but it felt far away. Jonah could hear his thoughts too. Garrison's fear. His desire to control. To contain that I can control them, Jonah thought suddenly. The raptors, the T-Rex. He could feel them, waiting, listening. And without thinking, Jonah reached out. The control was instant. The raptors, housed in their nearby enclosures, suddenly stopped moving. Jonah felt their movements slow, their breathing steady. And then, with a single thought, he commanded them. The first raptor lunged forward, slamming against the door of its cage, the metal bending under the pressure. Jonah gasped. The creature was under his command. What the hell? Garrison backed away, eyes wide. Jonah's mind spun. He had no idea what he was doing, but he knew one thing: these creatures were his now. And they were powerful. More powerful than he had ever imagined. It was like controlling a part of the world's history, a living, breathing manifestation of the planet's most dangerous predators, but the chaos had only just begun. As Jonah slowly regained control of his thoughts, he looked around the room, realizing the magnitude of what had just happened. The system was still unstable, and Garrison was panicking. The sound of a massive roar echoed from down the hall. Jonah didn't even need to see it. He knew what was happening. The T-Rex, the centerpiece of the project, was on the move. And it wasn't alone. "Jonah, stop them!" Garrison shouted, his voice strained with fear, but Jonah didn't respond. He was no longer just Jonah. He was something else. Something greater. And he had no idea how to control it. The T-Rex was no longer contained. And Jonah. Jonah was at the center of it all. Suddenly, a massive crash echoed from the far end of the facility. Jonah's thoughts raced again, and the T-Rex stopped. The giant beast froze in place, just inches away from Garrison, who had backed into the corner. Jonah felt a surge of power flood him. With a single thought, he commanded the T-Rex to step back. Slowly, gently, the creature obeyed. Garrison, pale and breathless, stared at Jonah. You can control them?" Jonah's voice was a growl. "I can control them all." But control wasn't the issue. Jonah didn't just control the dinosaurs. He was one of them now. The power was intoxicating. Jonah felt like he was part of something bigger. Something primal. He could sense the world around him in ways he'd never imagined. He could feel the vibrations in the ground, the pulse of the air. His senses were sharp, sharper than they had ever been. And the dinosaurs? They weren't just soldiers to him anymore. They were his pack. Jonah looked down at his hands, watching as they flexed with a strength he hadn't known he had. His body was changing, adapting, becoming something else entirely. This was just the beginning. Jonah's mind raced as the raptors and the T-Rex continued to stand still at his command. The power coursing through his veins was unlike anything he had ever felt before. The sheer force of it was both overwhelming and exhilarating. For a brief moment, Jonah felt like a god, a creature of both the ancient past and the future, capable of shaping reality itself. Garrison took a step back, his eyes filled with disbelief. The man was trying to make sense of Jonah, but Jonah was no longer the person Garrison thought he knew. Jonah's thoughts were alien, his instincts now sharp and predatory. He could see everything clearly: the movements of Garrison, the tremors of the floor beneath them, the faint rustling of the air. His senses were operating on a level that transcended human comprehension. Jonah was hyper-aware of everything, but the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just controlling the dinosaurs, they were controlling him, too. He could feel them, feel their raw, untamed energy coursing through him. The connection was deeper than he could have imagined. It was as though his mind was locked in a primal symbiosis with these creatures, a bond that allowed him to command them, but also made him vulnerable to their instincts. As Garrison nervously fumbled with his comms device, Jonah's thoughts turned to the mission. The military had wanted him to activate these beasts. They had wanted to use them in battle, to unleash them on the world. But they hadn't counted on Jonah. They hadn't counted on him becoming one with the dinosaurs. Jonah clenched his fists, feeling the muscles in his arms tense with raw power. He could feel the raptor's eyes upon him, their silent waiting. The T-Rex, the pinnacle of the project, seemed to sense his hesitation. It let out a low growl, a sound so deep and guttural that it rattled the walls. Jonah instinctively commanded the T-Rex to remain still, but the animal's dominance was undeniable. The creature's eyes locked with his. There was a challenge there, a challenge that went beyond the simple desire to obey. Jonah had never known power like this. It wasn't just physical strength, it was a command over life itself, an ability to impose his will on creatures that had ruled the earth millions of years ago. The knowledge that he could break free of the government's control and lead these beasts to freedom surged through him. And yet, there was still fear, a fear that the power he now wielded could turn on him. Jonah, Garrison's voice broke through the fog in Jonah's mind, snapping him back to reality. We need to contain this. Now. The T-Rex, it's not just a weapon. It's an uncontrollable force. Jonah's gaze shifted toward the T-Rex. It was massive, its body rippling with muscle, its jaws capable of crushing anything in their path. Jonah felt a wave of both awe and terror wash over him. He could control it. He knew he could. But he wasn't sure if he should. The connection between Jonah and the dinosaurs was growing stronger by the second. He could hear their thoughts now, feel their hunger, their instincts, their rage. The T-Rex's roar filled the room again, this time more primal, more alive. Jonah's breath quickened as the ground beneath his feet vibrated with the beast's movements. Garrison backed up even further, his voice rising in panic. Jonah, get a hold of yourself. You can't control them forever. Jonah didn't respond. He was too focused on the T-Rex, too lost in the power he had unlocked. It was like a floodgate had been opened, and now, Jonah was drowning in it. The T-Rex's mind was like a roaring storm, a chaotic, untamed force. Jonah fought to rein it in, to make it obey him, but the creature was more than just an animal. It was a symbol of dominance, a symbol of nature itself. Stay back. Garrison shouted as he fumbled with a control device. Jonah barely registered the sound of the device, barely noticed the panic in the officer's voice. His senses were overwhelmed by the power of the dinosaurs. He had no interest in Garrison's orders. He didn't want to contain them. He wanted to set them free. Without thinking, Jonah pushed Garrison aside, stepping forward as the T-Rex took another step, its massive footfall shaking the ground. Jonah could feel the weight of its presence, the enormity of its potential for destruction. But he wasn't afraid. He was its master now. And the idea of being a servant to anyone, least of all the military, felt like a distant memory. The T-Rex let out another low growl, its eyes narrowing as it studied Jonah. It was no longer a mindless beast, it was a warrior, a partner, something that Jonah could command. The bond between them was undeniable. Jonah reached out with his mind, trying to assert control over the beast. The T-Rex hesitated, its primal instincts pushing back, but Jonah pressed harder, commanding it to kneel. Slowly, the massive creature bent its knees, lowering its head in submission. Garrison's voice was frantic. Jonah, stop. This is insane. You're out of control. Jonah turned to face Garrison, a wicked grin spreading across his face. I'm not the one who's out of control, Garrison, Jonah said, his voice a growl. You are. You've been using these creatures like tools. But they're not just weapons. They're living, breathing beings. And now, they're mine. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of Jonah's newfound power. He was no longer a technician. No longer just a cog in the military machine. He was the master of an ancient army, a force that had the potential to reshape the world, but there was one more thing Jonah needed to understand. The dinosaurs weren't just part of the military's secret project, they were part of something much bigger. Something far more dangerous that he felt it then, the presence of something else, something lurking beneath the surface. The dinosaurs weren't just an experiment. They were the key to something larger, something dark. Jonah didn't know it yet, but the project was far from over. And now, he was the focal point. The T-Rex let out a triumphant roar, shaking the facility to its core. Jonah grinned again, feeling the creature's power flood him. But as the beast's roar echoed through the halls, Jonah's sense of victory began to fade, replaced by an unsettling realization that he wasn't just controlling the dinosaurs were controlling him. Jonah had never been one for introspection. He had never really thought about his role in the grand scheme of things. He had always been content working behind the scenes, fixing things, tinkering with machines, making sure everything ran smoothly. But that was before the serum. Before the power. Now, he was part of something bigger, something dangerous. The military had been using the dinosaurs for years, testing them, genetically modifying them to be weapons of war. Jonah had known about it. Hell, he had even worked on some of the tech that helped make it all possible. But what he hadn't realized, what no one had realized, was that the dinosaurs were more than just weapons. They were alive. They had instincts. They had minds of their own, and now, Jonah could feel them, hear them, understand them in ways he never thought possible. It was exhilarating, but it was also terrifying. Jonah turned back to the T-Rex, whose amber eyes seemed to bore into his soul. He had to get a grip. He couldn't let this power consume him. He had to remain in control, but how could he? The room was still filled with the echoes of the T-Rex's roar, and Jonah could hear the faint scraping of claws against the concrete floor. The raptors, too, were moving, restless, waiting for a command. Jonah could feel their presence like a wave, a force just on the edge of his consciousness, waiting for him to reach out. But as Jonah's thoughts swirled with power, he began to realize that there was something even more dangerous lurking in the shadows of the facility. Something that had been hidden from him all along. Something he couldn't control. The true purpose of the dinosaur program was far darker than Jonah had ever imagined, and it was about to be revealed. The roar of the T-Rex continued to echo through the corridors, reverberating in Jonah's chest. He stood at the center of it all, feeling the rush of power that surged through him, the weight of the creature's presence pressing in on him. But something about the air had shifted. It wasn't just the raptors moving restlessly behind him. It wasn't just the ground shaking beneath his feet. It was something darker. The uneasy feeling creeping over him grew stronger by the second. Jonah's mind swirled with thoughts. He could hear the T-Rex's pulse, feel its heavy breathing in his chest. His own heart beat in rhythm with it, but something inside him began to twitch with a creeping sense of urgency. The air smelled different, electric, charged with tension. He could sense it in the facility's walls. Something had changed, and he wasn't sure if it was the dinosaurs or something far more dangerous. Jonah, Garrison's voice was thin, nearly cracking. "We need to get out of here. This whole thing is coming apart. You're not thinking straight. Whatever you've done, it's not just about the dinosaurs anymore." Jonah barely heard him. The sound of the raptors pacing, their claws scraping the floor, was deafening in his ears. The T-Rex's growl vibrated through his very bones. And then, like a light bulb flickering on, the thought hit him, sharp and sudden: they weren't just animals. The dinosaurs, his army of monsters, were part of something much bigger. He had sensed it before but hadn't put the pieces together. The military wasn't just after a new weapon, they were building an army. A new world order. The dinosaurs were not just meant to destroy enemies. They were being bred to control humanity itself. A shiver ran down Jonah's spine. Jonah, Garrison's voice was more frantic now, stepping toward him with wide eyes. "You don't know what you're messing with. The higher-ups, they didn't just inject you with the T-Rex DNA. That wasn't the plan. There's more to this. There's a bigger picture. You were the test subject, not just for the dinosaurs, but for what comes next. Jonah's chest tightened, his pulse quickening as the weight of Garrison's words hit him. The military's goal had never been to stop there. They weren't simply looking for dinosaur soldiers. Jonah had unlocked the final stage. He had become something they could control, and with his newfound ability to control the dinosaurs, they could control humanity itself. Suddenly, everything became clear. Jonah was just the beginning. The T-Rex and the raptors weren't the end goal. The government had been waiting for someone like him. Someone with the right connection to the dinosaurs. Jonah was the key. He didn't know how, but deep down, he knew the truth now. The sound of an alarm blared suddenly through the facility, harsh and jarring. A deep, throaty voice crackled through the intercom, amplified by the tension in the air. Warning, security breach in Sector 7. All personnel report immediately. Garrison turned to Jonah, his face ghostly pale. They know, don't they? They know what you can do now. Jonah didn't answer. He could hear the footsteps of soldiers rushing through the hallways, the sound of their boots thumping on the concrete. It wasn't the standard protocol for a simple breach. No, this was something else. The military had been prepared for something like this, but not in the way Jonah had imagined. They were waiting for me, Jonah murmured, the words tumbling out of his mouth before he could stop them. His heart raced. The pieces clicked into place. The project wasn't just a military tactic. The dinosaurs were the start of an even bigger weapon, one that didn't just require controlling dinosaurs. It required controlling their master. Jonah, the door to the command room burst open, and a team of heavily armed soldiers stormed in, rifles raised. Jonah could sense the fear in their movements, the way they hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking aim. Jonah wasn't afraid. He didn't need to be. He was far beyond their weapons now. Stand down, one of the soldiers shouted, his voice trembling slightly as he pointed his rifle at Jonah. This is your last warning. We don't want to hurt you. Jonah didn't move. He didn't need to. With a single thought, he commanded the T-Rex to step forward. The massive creature lumbered forward, its eyes locked on the soldiers. The ground trembled beneath its feet, and Jonah could feel the fear radiating from the men. They had no idea how to react. They weren't prepared for Jonah to be in control of the monsters they had created. The power surged through him again, like a primal wave crashing over him. Jonah, stop! Garrison shouted, but it was too late. Jonah's control over the T-Rex was absolute. He had become more than just a soldier. More than just a man. He was now a link between the past and the future. The T-Rex halted just inches from the soldiers, its massive head lowering as it stared at them. The soldiers froze, too terrified to even breathe. Jonah's mind raced, but he didn't back down. These were the same men who had used him, manipulated him, controlled him. Now, the tables had turned. Now, he was in charge. Move them out, Jonah growled, and with a thought, the T-Rex gently nudged one of the soldiers aside with its massive snout. The others quickly scattered, their hands shaking as they backed away. Jonah was in control. Get to the control room, he muttered, turning to Garrison, who was still standing there, shaking with fear. Jonah's grip on the power was growing stronger, but there was something gnawing at him. He wasn't sure if it was the remnants of his humanity or the overwhelming sense that he was still just a pawn in someone else's game. He looked down at his hands, still trembling, still not quite his own. He wasn't sure if he could ever go back to the man he once was. Come on, Jonah. This is insane, Garrison pleaded, his voice breaking. You can't just. Jonah raised his hand, silencing him. With a single thought, the raptors stepped forward, their eyes glowing with the same hunger Jonah felt in his own chest. Don't tell me what I can and can't do, Garrison. You don't get it. They don't get it. The dinosaurs aren't the weapons. I am. He could see it now, as if the veil had been pulled away. The true purpose of the program wasn't about controlling dinosaurs. It was about controlling Jonah. But now, he had control. The power was his, and he would use it however he saw fit. And if that meant taking down the entire military, so be it. Jonah turned his back on the soldiers, already moving toward the next phase of the plan. The dinosaurs followed him like loyal soldiers, waiting for his command. They were part of him now, just as he was part of them. The control room was just ahead, and Jonah could feel the hum of the building's machinery. The power, the true power, was within reach. He could feel the influence of the military pulling at him, trying to maintain its hold, but he wasn't interested anymore. The government had used him, manipulated him. But no more. The door to the control room slid open with a hiss, revealing a dozen armed technicians, all working feverishly at their stations. They didn't even see Jonah as he walked in, flanked by the raptors and the T-Rex. Jonah smiled, a dark, predatory grin. "It's over," he whispered. "You've lost." The last vestiges of his humanity faded as Jonah reached out with his mind, connecting with the soldiers, the scientists, the entire facility. The dinosaurs were his now, and with them, he would take control of the world. The government had created him. Now, it would bow before him. Jonah's eyes burned with a fierce intensity, a tyrant's hunger for power. The world was about to change. And Jonah, with his army of dinosaurs, was the one who would lead it.